My name is Dick Jewell, the 8th president of Grove City College, and for the past now third year, it's been my high honor and privilege to briefly introduce the annual Ronald Reagan Memorial Lecture here at Grove City College. Tonight, this lecture, for the first time, is being webcast across the country. So there are a lot more folks around the United States that will be, in a simultaneous way, listening to the colloquy and discussion tonight between Dr. Paul Kangor and Mr. Herb Meyer. Ronald Reagan Lecture, now in its third year, has had two very interesting predecessor lectures. The first one, of course, was Michael Reagan, the son of the president. The second was Mr. Reagan's Attorney General and Chief of Staff, I believe, when he was the Governor of California for a time, Mr. Ed Meese. And tonight we have Mr. Herb Meyer as the Executive Assistant to the Director of the CIA, Mr. Bill Casey, during the Reagan administration. A great deal of thanks when you have the Center for Vision and Values as your sponsor. You know, that's the pedagogical think tank here at Grove City College. Of course, goes to the many men and women, groups, foundations that support on an annual basis the Vision and Values Center. And especially we'd like to thank tonight, some are with us, able to be with us, Phil and Beth Gasowitz, Dr. Tom and Sandy Usher, the Heritage Foundation, Washington, D.C., and representing Heritage is Mr. Jeff Trimbath, who's with us. The Donahue Family Foundation, that's Jack and Radora, their 13 children, the founder of Federated Investors in Pittsburgh, who have been a wonderful supporter of this evening and of the Center for V&V over the last 3 years. The JM Foundation. And we'd also like to thank Ron and Sally Marburger and Carl and Nancy Stiebel for their support. There are two receptions following the lecture. A student club, the Crimson Conservatives, will be holding a birthday party in honor of Ronald Reagan in Stauffer Lounge. That is in this building at the other end in the new area of Pew Fine Arts. Mr. Reagan's birthday is tomorrow, of course, February the 6th. The other reception will be in the Pew Memorial Room adjacent to the lobby, where Dr. Kangor's books and Mr. Meyer's DVD, The Siege of Western Civilization, will also be on sale. And now a brief introduction, if I may, of Dr. Paul Kangor and Mr. Herb Meyer. Paul Kangor is the Executive Director of the Center for Vision and Values and a political science professor here at Grove City College. He is a best-selling biographer of Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, Judge Bill Clark, and Hillary Clinton. He has a bachelor and PhD. Why would that? He has a bachelor. We're going to be hearing more from her over the years, folks, I can guarantee you. He has a bachelor and a PhD degrees from the University of Pittsburgh and a master's degree from American University. Mr. Herb Meyer served during the Reagan administration as Special Assistant to the Director of Central Intelligence and Vice Chairman of the CIA's National Intelligence Council. In these positions, he managed production of the U.S. National Intelligence Estimates and other top-secret projections for the President and his senior national security advisors. He is widely credited with being the first senior United States government official to forecast the Soviet Union's collapse, which he did in the early 1980s, to considerable, at that time, political derision. He later was awarded the National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal, which is the intelligence community's highest honor. Prior to his service with the United States government, he was an associate editor of Fortune magazine, where he was among the magazine's top international specialists. He is author of several books, including Real World Intelligence, The War Against Progress, and Hard Thinking. And with his wife, Jill, he is co-author of How to Write, a handbook used widely at colleges throughout the world. Mr. Meyer's articles and essays in politics and about our country's intelligence service in the wake of 9/11 have been published in the Wall Street Journal, National Review Online, and Policy Review. He is a frequent guest on leading television news programs. Mr. Meyer's DVD, The Siege of Western Civilization, is superb, and it is clear he shares Grove City College's values. In the DVD, he says, "We haven't taught our children much about Western civilization. If you come to the town I live in and ask a bunch of high school students what is Western civilization? They'll look at you for a moment and say, slavery, or the oppression of women, or we don't recycle. Meyer continues, if you reply, well, is that it? They're likely to say, well, yes, I think so. Meyer says, well, it isn't. We've got to teach them how we became who we are. The heritage, of course, of America is of which he speaks. It is our responsibility, Mr. Meyer says, to make sure that when we step off stage and we turn things over to our children's generation, Western civilization is in place and they have the knowledge and character and integrity to defend it. This is the task that has fallen to us. Herb, we agree with you so much here at Grove City College. A student is required, for example, to take 3 years of courses in Western civilization, our core curriculum, general education requirements, as we call them. And we're here tonight to learn more about what you and Ronald Reagan did in playing your part in preserving Western civilization. Welcome to you, Herb Meyer. Welcome to Dr. Paul Kangor. I think we're in for an engaging evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the 3rd annual Ronald Reagan Memorial Lecture. Gentlemen.
Thank you, President Jewell. We could not do these things without the support of President Jewell. He's absolutely indispensable in ways you can't even imagine. So thank you very much. The format for tonight, I will talk to Herb. We'll have a conversation for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll start taking questions from you folks out there. And typically in the past, those of you who've been here to the last 2 Reagan lectures, we've had a big screen in the back with video clips and photos and so forth. And we asked Herb about 2 months ago if he could help us locate some photos and video of the CIA director, Bill Casey, because we couldn't find any anywhere. I mean, the things practically don't exist. I mean, the Reagan Library doesn't have them, and it wasn't like he was on the 6 o'clock evening news every night. So this year we decided we had to scrap that. But we are going high tech, as President Jewell said. We are webcasting this tonight for the first time. So thank you for joining us, and tell everybody where you came from here. How far you came up from Florida, but where do you live?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Grove City College is a very special place, and it's an honor to be here. And thank you for that.
Thank you.
I live out on the West Coast now, up in the San Juan Islands in Washington State, but I'm from Brooklyn. And I grew up in Brooklyn, and when I graduated from high school, I went to Brooklyn College. Never crossed my mind to go out of town to college. I'd never met anyone who'd gone away to college. So I just took the Nostrand Avenue bus the other way, went to Brooklyn College.
And that would have been, I want to retrace your steps before we get to the Reagan years. All right, so you grew up in Brooklyn, and then you started out of college. Did you start working for Fortune magazine right out of college?
No, you don't start working for Fortune out of college. No, what happened is this. I wanted to get into world stuff. I was interested in the Cold War and the world, and I wanted to get out of Brooklyn and travel. So I majored in political science and economics. And I studied Russian language. I thought that would help. And between my junior and senior years, my parents let me spend the summer at the University of Mexico. So I studied economics there. I was actually the first member of my family ever to get on an airplane. And then when I graduated from college, I kind of conned them into letting me go to Paris for a year to take courses at the University of Paris. And that was an extraordinary experience, to live in Paris and take grad courses at the university.
This would be in the 70s?
No, this was the mid-60s.
Okay.
That was 65, 66. And so I spent a year in Paris. And then I wanted to be in the military. The Vietnam War was at its peak then. Everyone was trying to avoid the draft. I was trying to get in. And I got into officer candidate school at the U.S. Navy, OCS, and I was the only guy there who wanted to be there. Everyone else was there to avoid getting drafted, and they threw me out. I had very bad eyesight, which they knew. I'm wearing contact lenses now. And they wanted me in there as an intelligence officer because I spoke Russian. And then they sort of forgot what they were doing and threw me out. So at the height of the Vietnam War, the only man at OCS who wanted to be there was given an honorable discharge and sent home. It was crazy. And I needed a job. So I got a job for $85 a week writing obituaries for a newspaper in upstate New York.
That's a dead-end job.
I was very good at it. When I left, people came up to me and said they were sorry they hadn't died while I was there. I wrote wonderful obituary. And I kind of became a political reporter, and then I kind of parlayed that to a junior job at the Wall Street Journal. And then I kind of got it moving a little and worked in New York and then in Washington at the Wall Street Journal's bureau. Then I worked for the Nixon administration for a couple of years. They formed a little group to do some reorganization. We created the Office of Management and Budget and the Environmental Protection Agency and things, and I worked there. And then I got to Fortune, and I was an associate editor, and I was their Soviet guy. So I was finally putting it together and
so writing about... So that would have been late 70s?
That was late 70s. Okay. So I was writing stuff about the Soviet Union, fairly lengthy stuff. In Fortune, you had some elbow room. And in my spare time, I wrote a book about economic growth, taxes and economics and things. And that book became part of the 1980 Reagan campaign because it had themes in it Governor Reagan was looking for in growth and technology. And they kind of adopted the book. And after the election, we were sitting home, our first child had been just born, and the phone rang, and of all people, it was Bill Casey. Now, Bill had been the campaign manager who was then named head of the CIA.
He had been the 1980 Reagan campaign manager.
Right. And by the way, this makes sense because in World War II, Bill ran secret operations for the OSS. He had enormous intelligence
experience. And tell him the OSS was the predecessor
to the CIA. That was our World War II intelligence service. And by everybody's judgment, the greatest intelligence service anywhere in history. And Bill had run secret operations. And so after Reagan was elected, he gave Bill the CIA because he wanted the same kind of intelligence service. Bill loved to read, and he loved to call authors. He would read something and just pick up the phone and call the author and say, "Hi, this is Bill Casey. It was wonderful," or "It was awful." And this was the first chance he got to make a call. And it's very flattering. You're holding a crying baby, and the guy who's just been named CIA director is calling to tell you he liked your book, and he's the one who gave it to Reagan, and that's how it got into the campaign. So he said, "Listen, come to my office, we'll meet and chat." My office was in the Time Life building at Rockefeller Center in New York. He was just closing his law office a few blocks away.
Now back up a little bit and tell us where does Casey come from?
He's a New Yorker, poor kid from Queens.
And at this point, he's probably in his 60s.
Well, he was 1 year older than Reagan.
Okay.
And he made a lot of money in tax work, venture capital, things like that. He'd been in several high government positions along the way, head of the SEC, an undersecretary of state. That World War II generation, in and out of government, very patriotic, deeply religious, seriously rich. And he was just beginning to...
Self-made. I mean,
self-made.
This is no inherited
money. And he was just
all.
drifting into kind of an affluent retirement when Reagan called.
Wow.
And said, "Would you help me with the campaign?" And the next thing you knew, he was CIA director.
So he would have been born about 1910.
Yeah,
roughly.
just 1 year older than Reagan.
Okay, so he's about 70, 71. He's thinking about retiring.
He was just drifting into retirement, and it's interesting. When he wound up running the CIA, Bill thought God gave him one more shot. He thought it was over. And suddenly, God gave him another shot. He wasn't going to waste it.
Yeah.
It was fascinating. But anyway.
One more shot to do what?
Well, that was the question. Yeah. The answer was take out the Soviet Union. We'll get into that in a second, but which he did. In any case, Bill, after this phone conversation, said, "Well, let's just meet, we'll talk." So we met at his office a few days later, and as soon as we met in person, he realized that I was the Soviet editor, or the Fortune editor, whose Soviet stuff he always read. He just hadn't made the connection that the guy who wrote the book was the same guy. So Bill being Bill, he said, "Well, why don't you come to Washington, help me run the CIA?" How often do you get asked? So I thought very deeply about that for about 2 seconds. I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." So that's how I became Bill's assistant. But by the way, I know we've got a lot of young people out here tonight. There's a point to telling you all this. When you're in college, there's always some little creep whose career takes off like a rocket from Cape Canaveral. You know, a kid goes from college to Harvard Law, and then he's clerking for a Supreme Court justice. Sure. And then he's an undersecretary of defense, and then you read he went into investment banking, he made $19 billion in 3 months, but nobody knows how. And the rest of us are just bouncing down the runway, just trying to get up enough altitude to get the career going. Sure. Listen, it's the way it is. And this is a classic case